In the spring of 1902, an archaeologist in Athens made a discovery that should have been impossible. Hidden within a corroded lump of bronze, pulled from the Mediterranean seabed 2 years earlier, were the finely cut teeth of precision gears. The object had been resting on the ocean floor for over 2,000 years. Yet the technology it contained would not appear again in human history until the mechanical clocks of medieval Europe some 14 centuries later. The Antikythera mechanism, as it came to be known, was not alone in defying the expected timeline of human innovation. In the temples of ancient Egypt, priests measured the hours of the night using water clocks, engineered with a mathematical sophistication that seemed to exceed their era's known capabilities. In Athens, an octagonal marble tower combined 8 precisely calibrated sundials, an internal hydraulic clock, and a wind direction system into a single public monument that functioned continuously for centuries. These 3 ancient timekeeping devices share a troubling distinction. By every conventional measure of technological history, none of them should have worked. The precision required to manufacture them, the scientific knowledge embedded in their design, and the engineering principles they employed all point to capabilities that historians long insisted ancient peoples simply did not possess. Yet the devices exist, they functioned, and in some cases, modern engineers with access to computer modeling and advanced metallurgy have struggled to understand exactly how ancient craftsmen achieved what they did. The question is not merely how these devices were built. The deeper mystery is what else the ancient world knew and what knowledge may have been lost forever in the centuries that followed. Long before the first written records, long before the rise of cities or the invention of the wheel, human beings looked to the sky and began to count. The movement of the sun across the horizon marked the rhythm of waking and sleeping. The phases of the moon provided a calendar for gathering, hunting, and eventually planting. The slow procession of stars across the night sky announced the changing seasons, telling ancient peoples when rivers would flood, when rains would come, and when the cold would arrive. Time, measured through celestial observation, was not an abstraction. It was survival. For agricultural societies, the stakes of accurate timekeeping could not have been higher. Planting crops too early risked frost damage. Planting too late meant harvests would fail before winter. The margin for error was measured in days, and those days were read in the angle of the sun at dawn, the position of certain stars at dusk, and the length of shadows at midday. Religious life, too, became intertwined with temporal precision. Temples across the ancient world oriented their structures to capture specific moments. The summer solstice sunrise, the equinox alignment, the heliacal rising of particular stars. Offerings to the gods required proper timing. Festivals had to occur on the correct dates. The priests who maintained these calendars held immense power, for they alone understood the celestial mechanics that governed sacred time. As civilizations grew more complex, so did their need for finer measurements. Maritime traders required knowledge of seasons and currents. Military campaigns depended on coordinating movements across vast distances. Tax collection followed agricultural cycles. Court proceedings needed standardized hours. The sun and moon and stars remained humanity's primary clocks, but the demand for precision and for timekeeping that could function, regardless of whether a time of day pushed ancient engineers toward mechanical solutions. The earliest attempts at artificial timekeeping were elegantly simple. A stick planted in the ground cast a shadow that moved as the sun crossed the sky. By marking the ground where the shadow fell at different times, ancient peoples created the first sundials. These devices appeared independently in Egypt, Mesopotamia, China, and elsewhere, a testament to the universal nature of the problem they solved. Sundials worked well enough during daylight hours, but they suffered from obvious limitations. Clouds obscured the sun. Night rendered them useless, and in regions far from the equator, the varying length of days across seasons complicated their calibration. Water offered an alternative. The basic principle was straightforward. Water flowing at a constant rate could measure time independently of the sun. The simplest water clocks consisted of a vessel with a small hole near the bottom. As water drained out, marks on the interior indicated the passage of hours. These devices, known by their Greek name, klepsydre meaning water thieves, appeared in Egypt and Babylon by at least 1500 BCE, and possibly earlier. They allowed priests to time rituals conducted in the darkness of inner temple chambers. They permitted judges to limit the length of speeches in court. They enabled astronomers to measure the duration of celestial events that occurred at night. Yet water clocks presented their own challenges. As the water level in a vessel dropped, the pressure pushing water through the outlet decreased, causing the flow rate to slow. A clock that ran accurately in its first hour would lose time in its second and third. Temperature affected water's viscosity, meaning the same clock would run differently in summer and winter. Evaporation introduced further errors over long periods. Solving these problems required not just craftsmanship, but genuine engineering and certain understanding of fluid dynamics, materials science, and mathematical relationships that historians long assumed ancient peoples lacked. The assumption of ancient simplicity shaped scholarly attitudes for centuries. The Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution fostered a powerful narrative of progress, a belief that human civilization advanced steadily from primitive origins toward modern sophistication. Within this framework, ancient peoples were viewed as intelligent but limited, capable of impressive feats of labor, pyramids, the Great Wall, but not of the kind of precision engineering that defined modern achievement. Technology, in this view, evolved gradually and predictably, each generation building incrementally upon the last. The three devices at the center of this account challenge that narrative in fundamental ways. The antique Ethera mechanism, discovered in fragments among the cargo of a Roman-era shipwreck, contained a system of interlocking gears so sophisticated that nothing comparable would appear in the historical record for well over 1,000 years. The water clock of Karnak, carved from alabaster during the reign of an Egyptian pharaoh in the Bronze Age, demonstrated a solution to the problem of variable water pressure that seemed to require mathematical knowledge its creators supposedly did not possess. The Tower of the Winds in Athens integrated multiple timekeeping system sundials, water clocks, and wind measurement into a single public monument of startling complexity and durability. Each device, examined in isolation, might be dismissed as an anomaly, a lucky accident, or a misinterpretation by modern research. Taken together, they suggest something more significant, that certain ancient societies achieved levels of technical sophistication that were subsequently lost, forgotten, or never adequately recorded in texts that survive to the present day. They hint at traditions of knowledge passed from master to apprentice, guarded within priestly or artisan classes that left few written traces but produced tangible results in bronze and stone and water. When these devices first came to the attention of modern scholars, the reaction was often skepticism or outright dismissal. The antique Ethera mechanism sat neglected in an Athens museum for decades after its recovery, its significance unrecognized because the very idea of ancient Greek-geared machinery seemed absurd. Early analysts who glimpsed the gear teeth within the corroded mass assumed the object must have fallen from a much later shipwreck, contaminating the ancient site. The notion that Greeks in the 2nd or 1st century BC possessed the capability to design and manufacture such a device contradicted everything historians thought they knew about the technological timeline of Western civilization. Similar resistance greeted close analysis of Egyptian water clocks. The mathematical precision required to shape a vessel so that its changing geometry compensated for decreasing water pressure implied knowledge of principles that would not be formally articulated until the development of calculus in the 17th century. Scholars preferred to believe that Egyptian craftsmen had simply stumbled upon effective shapes through trial and error over many generations, rather than accept that they might have possessed theoretical understanding that left no surviving documentary evidence. Only in recent decades, with the application of advanced imaging technologies and a growing willingness among historians to question old assumptions, have these devices begun to receive the serious attention they deserve. X-ray tomography has revealed hidden structures within the Antikythera mechanism. Experimental archaeology has tested the performance of replicated water clocks. Careful measurement of the Tower of the Winds has confirmed the precision of its sundial calibrations. The evidence, examined without prejudice, points consistently toward ancient capabilities that exceeded what textbooks long described. What follows is an examination of each device, in turn its discovery, its design, its function, and the questions it raises about what ancient peoples truly knew. The story is not one of simple answers. Mysteries remain, and scholarly debate continues. but the devices themselves stand as undeniable testimony that the ancient world was more technically sophisticated than generations of modern observers believed. The challenge now is to understand how such achievements were possible, why the knowledge behind them was lost, and what other secrets of ancient ingenuity may yet await discovery. The story of these remarkable devices begins not in Greece, but in the Nile Valley, more than 3,000 years ago, during the reign of one of Egypt's most prosperous pharaohs. To understand the water clock of Karnak, one must first understand the world in which it was created, a world where time itself was considered sacred, where the hours of the night held as much religious significance as the hours of the day, and where the priests who measured those hours wielded enormous power. Amenhotep III ruled Egypt from approximately 1386 to 1349 BCE, presiding over an empire at the height of its wealth and influence. His reign marked a golden age of monument building, diplomatic achievement, and artistic flourishing. The great temple complex at Karnak, dedicated to the god Amun-Ra, expanded dramatically under his patronage. Massive pylons, towering obelisks, and elaborately decorated halls rose along the banks of the Nile near the city of Thebes. Within these sacred precincts, hundreds of priests conducted rituals around the clock, offering prayers, sacrifices, and hymns to the gods at precisely designated hours. The challenge of timekeeping within the temple was considerable. During daylight, sundials and shadow clocks could mark the passage of hours with reasonable accuracy. But much of Egyptian religious practice occurred at night, in the darkened inner sanctums, where no sunlight penetrated, or during the hours before dawn, when priests prepared offerings for the rising sun. The movements of stars provided one method of tracking nocturnal time. Egyptian astronomers had developed the system of 36 groups of stars whose sequential rising marked the progress of night, but stellar observation required clear skies and trained observers. A more reliable method was needed. Water clocks had existed in Egypt for centuries before Amenhotep III's reign. The earliest surviving examples date to at least the reign of Amenhotep I, some 200 years earlier. These early clepsydrae were relatively simple, cylindrical or slightly conical vessels with a small outlet near the base. Their interiors marked with lines indicating the hours. Water placed in the vessel at nightfall would slowly drain, and a priest checking the water level against the marked lines could determine how much of the night had passed. The limitations of these simple designs were well understood. A cylindrical vessel loses water pressure as it empties, causing the flow rate to decrease over time. The first hour drains faster than the second, and the second faster than the third. Unless compensated for, this effect renders the hour markings inaccurate. Furthermore, the Egyptians divided both day and night into 12 hours each, but these were not hours of fixed length. In summer, when daylight lasted longer, the 12 daylight hours were each longer than in winter, while the 12 nighttime hours were correspondingly shorter. This system of temporal or seasonal hours meant that a clock calibrated for one season would be incorrect in another. The water clock of Karnak, discovered during archaeological excavations at the temple complex in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, represented a sophisticated solution to both problems. Carved from a single block of translucent alabaster, the vessel took the form of a truncated cone, wider at the top and narrower at the bottom. This shape was not merely aesthetic. The geometry of the cone meant that as the water level dropped, the decreasing pressure was partially offset by the decreasing volume of water above each unit of height. In simpler terms, the narrowing of the vessel compensated for the slowing of the flow, producing a more uniform rate of descent for the water surface. The precision of this compensation astonished modern engineers who analyzed the clock's dimensions. The angle of taper, the ratio of top diameter to bottom diameter, and the size of the outlet hole all had to be carefully calculated to achieve the desired effect. While the compensation was not perfect, no passive system could fully eliminate the pressure differential. It represented a dramatic improvement over cylindrical designs. The clock kept reasonably accurate time from its first hour to its 12th. More remarkable still were the markings on the clock's interior. Instead of a single set of hour lines, the vessel contained 12 separate scales, one for each month of the Egyptian calendar. Each scale was calibrated for the different lengths of nighttime hours in that particular month. A priest, using the clock in the month of Thoth, when nights were relatively short, would read from a different scale than a priest using it in the month of Tebe, when nights were longer. The clock thus automatically adjusted for the system of temporal hours, providing accurate readings throughout the year. The exterior of the vessel was decorated with astronomical imagery. A frieze depicting the 36 decans encircled the rim, visually connecting the water clock to the stellar timekeeping methods it supplemented. Inscriptions identified the clock as belonging to the temple and invoked divine protection for its accuracy. The object was not merely a tool, but a sacred instrument, imbued with religious significance and crafted with corresponding care. How the Egyptian craftsmen who made this clock arrived at the correct geometry remains a subject of scholarly debate. No surviving Egyptian mathematical texts describe the principles of fluid dynamics that would be necessary to calculate the taper analytically. The Rind mathematical papyrus and other documents demonstrate that Egyptian mathematicians were capable of sophisticated calculations involving volumes, areas, and proportions. But nothing in the surviving record explicitly addresses the relationship between vessel shape and flow rate. Some historians argue that the design must have been developed empirically through generations of trial and error, with craftsmen gradually refining the shape based on observed performance rather than theoretical prediction. Others suggest that the necessary knowledge existed but was never committed to writing, preserved instead within the oral traditions of priestly or artisan guilds who had no incentive to share their secrets. Whatever its origin, the water clock of Karnak demonstrates that Egyptian engineers of the Bronze Age possessed practical solutions to problems that would not be mathematically formalized until the early modern period. The clock worked. It kept time accurately enough to regulate the sacred rituals of one of the ancient world's greatest temples, and it did so using principles that scholars long insisted its creators could not have understood. Nearly 13 centuries after the water clock of Karnak was carved, and some 1,500 miles to the northwest, a different civilization was pushing the boundaries of mechanical ingenuity in ways that would not be surpassed for more than a millennium. The story of the Antikythera mechanism begins not with its creation, but with its rediscovery, in circumstances so improbable that the object very nearly remained lost forever. In the spring of 1900, a group of sponge divers from the Greek island of Symi were sailing home from their seasonal harvesting grounds along the North African coast. As they passed through the strait between the island of Antikythera and the northwestern tip of Crete, a storm forced them to seek shelter. While waiting for the weather to clear, the divers decided to explore the seafloor beneath their anchorage. What happened next would eventually reshape the history of technology. A diver named Elias Statiadis descended to a depth of approximately 45 meters and encountered a scene that terrified him. The seabed was littered with what appeared to be human bodies and horses, their forms frozen in eerie stillness. Statiadis surfaced in a panic, convinced he had discovered the aftermath of some terrible disaster. The captain of the diving crew, Dimitrios Kondos, descended to investigate and quickly recognized what Statiadis had seen. Not bodies, but bronze and marble statues, their green patina and encrusted surfaces giving them a ghostly appearance in the dim underwater light. Kondos reported the find to Greek authorities, and over the following 2 years, a salvage operation recovered an extraordinary collection of ancient artifacts from the wreck. The ship, dating to approximately the 1st century BCE, had been carrying a cargo of Greek treasure as sculptures, pottery, glassware, coins, jewelry, and amphorae of wine. Archaeologists speculated that the vessel was transporting loot from Greek cities to Rome, perhaps in the aftermath of military conquest or as part of the thriving antiquities trade that enriched Roman collectors. Among the items brought to the surface was an unremarkable lump of corroded bronze, roughly the size of a large book, encrusted with marine deposits and fused into a single mass. It attracted little attention amid the spectacular sculptures and other treasures. The object was placed in storage at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, where it remained largely ignored for nearly 2 years. In May 1902, an archaeologist named Valerio Stais was examining artifacts from the Antikythera wreck when he noticed something unusual about the corroded bronze lump. The corrosion had cracked in places, revealing glimpses of the object's interior. What Stais saw astonished him. The unmistakable teeth of precisely cut gears, interlocking with other gears in a complex mechanical arrangement. The implications were staggering. Geared mechanisms of this sophistication were not supposed to exist in the ancient world. The earliest known geared clocks in Europe dated to the medieval period, more than 1,000 years after the Antikythera ship sank. Either the corroded object was far younger than the rest of the cargo, somehow mixed into the wreck from a later period, or everything historians believed about ancient technology was wrong. The scholarly establishment initially favored the first explanation. It seemed far more plausible that a medieval or Renaissance artifact had contaminated the site than that ancient Greeks had possessed capabilities so far in advance of their time. The object was set aside, treated as a curiosity of uncertain provenance, and decades passed, with little serious investigation. The man who would eventually reveal the mechanism's true significance was Derek J. DeSala Price, a British historian of science working at Yale University. Price first encountered the Antikythera fragments in 1951 and immediately recognized their importance. Over the following years, he conducted painstaking research, examining the fragments directly, consulting with specialists in ancient Greek technology, and working to understand the object's function. In 1959, Price published an article in Scientific American that brought the Antikythera mechanism to international attention. His analysis revealed a device of extraordinary complexity, a mechanical calculator designed to predict astronomical phenomena with remarkable accuracy. The article generated significant public interest, but also skepticism from scholars who found Price's claims difficult to accept. Determined to prove his case, Price collaborated with Greek nuclear physicist Karakalos in 1971 to conduct the first X-ray and gamma-ray imaging of the mechanism as fragments. The images revealed far more than was visible on the corroded surfaces. Inside the fused mass of bronze were the remains of at least 30 interlocking gears, precisely cut and carefully arranged. The mechanism was not a simple device, but a sophisticated calculating machine. Price published his comprehensive analysis in 1974. In a monograph titled Gears from the Greeks, the work established definitively that the mechanism was genuine, that it dated to the ancient world, and that it represented a level of technical achievement previously unknown from that era. Price estimated the device's date of manufacture as approximately 87 BC, based on astronomical calibrations, though subsequent research has suggested it may be somewhat older. The full revelation of the mechanism's capabilities would have to wait for even more advanced imaging technology. In 2005, an international research team known as the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project began a new investigation using cutting-edge techniques. Hewlett-Packard contributed a digital imaging system capable of capturing surface details at extremely high resolution. X-Tech Systems, a British company, provided a custom-built CT scanner that could image the interior of the fragments at a resolution of 1/10 of a millimeter. The results transformed understanding of the device. Hidden inscriptions invisible on the corroded surfaces emerged clearly in the CT scans. These inscriptions constituted a kind of instruction manual, explaining the mechanism's functions and how to interpret its displays. The researchers discovered that the mechanism was even more complex than Price had realized, incorporating features that had eluded earlier analysis. The Antikythera mechanism, the team determined, was a hand-ported mechanical computer designed to calculate and display astronomical information. The user would input a date by turning a crank on the side of the wooden case that originally housed a mechanism. The internal gears would then rotate the device's pointers to show the corresponding positions of the Sun, Moon, and probably the 5 planets visible to the naked eye: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The front dial displayed the position of the Sun and Moon against the background of the zodiac constellations, using a scale that tracked the Sun's apparent movement through the year. A separate pointer indicated the Moon's position, and a rotating ball, half silver and half black, showed the Moon's phase. The back of the mechanism contained 2 large spiral dials. The upper dial tracked the Metonic cycle, a period of 235 lunar months, almost exactly 19 solar years after which the phases of the Moon recur, on approximately the same calendar dates. This cycle, named after the 5th century BCE Athenian astronomer Meton, was fundamental to Greek calendar systems, which attempted to reconcile lunar months with solar years. A subsidiary dial within the Metonic spiral tracked the 4-year cycle of the Panhellenic Games, including the Olympics. The lower back dial tracked the Saros cycle, a period of approximately 18 years and 11 days, after which the pattern of solar and lunar eclipses repeats. By knowing where the mechanism stood in the Saros cycle, a user could predict when eclipses would occur. A subsidiary dial tracked the Exeligmos cycle, equal to 3, Saros periods, which provided even more precise eclipse predictions. Perhaps most astonishing was the mechanism's treatment of the moon's motion. Ancient Greek astronomers knew that the moon does not move at a constant speed through the sky. Its velocity varies as it orbits the Earth, moving faster when closer and slower when farther away, a consequence of its elliptical orbit, though the Greeks did not describe the orbit in those terms. The Antikythera mechanism incorporated this variable motion through a remarkably ingenious device, a penslot mechanism that translated uniform circular motion into variable motion, accurately modeling the moon's changing speed. This feature alone would have required sophisticated understanding of the moon's apparent motion and considerable engineering skill to implement. The gear train that drove the Luna display included a small gear mounted slightly off-center on a larger gear, with a pin protruding from the smaller gear engaged in a slot on yet another component. As the gears rotated, this arrangement produced the subtle acceleration and deceleration that matched the moon's actual behavior. The precision of the gearing posed its own mysteries. The teeth of the mechanism's gears were cut with remarkable accuracy, their triangular profiles regular and evenly spaced. Modern attempts to replicate this precision using only tools available in the ancient world have proven extremely challenging. Bronze is softer than steel and more forgiving of imperfections, but the Antikythera gears nonetheless display a level of craftsmanship that suggests highly developed metalworking traditions. Who made the mechanism and where remains uncertain. The inscriptions on the device use a Corinthian calendar, suggesting a connection to Corinth or one of its colonies. Syracuse, the wealthy Greek city in Sicily, was a Corinthian colony and also the home of Archimedes, the legendary mathematician and inventor who reportedly constructed mechanical models of the heavens. Ancient sources, including the Roman statesman Cicero, describe devices similar to the Antikythera mechanism being displayed in Rome, brought there after the conquest of Syracuse into BCE. An alternative hypothesis places the mechanism's origin on the island of Rhodes, a center of astronomical study in the Hellenistic period. The astronomer Hipparchus worked on Rhodes in the 2nd century BCE, and is credited with many of the astronomical theories embedded in the mechanism's design. The astronomer and philosopher Posidonius also worked on Rhodes and was known to have constructed celestial globes. Whatever its specific origin, the Antikythera mechanism was almost certainly not unique. The sophistication of its design implies a tradition of mechanical construction, a community of craftsmen and scholars working together over time to develop and refine such devices. That almost no trace of this tradition survives in the historical record speaks to the fragility of ancient knowledge and the random chances of preservation and destruction. Approximately half a century after the Antikythera mechanism was built, scholars now dated to roughly 150100 BCE. Another remarkable structure arose in Athens that similarly integrated sophisticated timekeeping with astronomical knowledge. The Tower of the Winds, as it came to be called, was not a portable device, but a public monument, constructed in the commercial heart of the ancient city to serve merchants, travelers, and citizens with accurate information about time and weather. The patron, or patrons, who commissioned the tower remain uncertain. Some ancient sources suggest a connection to Julius Caesar, who visited Athens and may have funded construction as a gift to the city. Others attribute the tower to wealthy private benefactors or to the city government itself. What is certain is the identity of its designer, Andronikos of Carestes, a Greek astronomer from Macedonia or Syria who combined architectural skill with scientific knowledge. The tower rose in the Roman Agora, the marketplace that served as the commercial center of Hellenistic and Roman Athens. Its location was deliberate. Merchants needed reliable timekeeping to coordinate business. Travelers needed to know the hour before setting out, and everyone benefited from understanding which way the wind was blowing and what weather might follow. Constructed from Pentelik, Marbelda, same gleaming, white stone used in the Parthenon, the tower stands approximately 12 meters tall and 8 meters in diameter. Its most distinctive feature is its octagonal shape, with each of the 8 faces oriented precisely toward a cardinal or intercardinal direction: north, northeast, east, southeast, south, southwest, west, and northwest. Near the top of each face, a carved frieze depicts one of the 8 anemoi, the wind gods of Greek mythology. Boreas, the north wind, appears as a bearded man in heavy robes, blowing a concha shell. Kaikias, the northeast wind, carries a shield full of hailstones. Apleats, the east wind, holds a cloak full of fruits and grain, representing the gentle rains he brings. Each figure's attributes correspond to the character of its wind, cold and harsh from the north, warm and fertile from the south and east. The friezes are not merely decorative. They served as an educational tool, allowing citizens unfamiliar with the winds to identify which was blowing by matching the current conditions to the depicted gods. The original roof was a conical structure, probably covered with marble tiles or possibly bronze sheets. At its apex stood a bronze figure of Triton, the fish-tailed sea god, holding a rod that served as a whip. As the wind blew, the figure rotated, and the rod pointed toward the frieze corresponding to the current wind direction. The Triton weather vane is long lost, but ancient descriptions and the mounting evidence of the tower summit confirm its existence. Below the friezes, on each of the 8 faces, sundials were carved directly into the marble surface. Each sundial was calibrated specifically for its orientation. The south-facing dial received the most direct sunlight and could function throughout most of the day. The east-facing dial was useful in morning hours, the west-facing dial in afternoon. Even the obliquely positioned dials northeast, southeast, southwest, northwest were calibrated to catch the sun at appropriate angles during their respective periods of illumination. The precision required to calculate and carve these sundials was considerable. Each dial needed to account for the latitude of Athens, the orientation of its specific face, and the geometry of shadow casting at various times of day and seasons of the year. The owl lines were not uniformly spaced, but followed the hyperbolic curves that correctly represent the sun's path. That all 8 dials agreed with one another that a merchant, crossing the at the same moment could check different faces and receive consistent readings, testified to the mathematical sophistication of their design. The sundials, of course, functioned only when the sun was shining. For cloudy days and nighttime hours, the tower contained an internal water clock, fed by an aqueduct carrying water from a spring on the slopes of the Acropolis. This hydraulic system entered the tower through a cylindrical annex attached to the tower's southern face, which housed the reservoir and regulating mechanisms. The internal mechanism of the water clock no longer survives, and ancient descriptions provide only fragmentary information about its design. Some sources suggest that the clock drove a mechanical display visible through openings in the tower's walls, possibly a rotating disc showing the positions of celestial bodies, or a pointer indicating the current hour. Others describe a simpler arrangement, with water levels visible against marked scales. Whatever its specific form, the internal clock allowed the tower to provide continuous timekeeping regardless of weather or time of day. The combination of systems represented a new kind of public technology, a comprehensive information center serving the practical needs of urban life. A visitor to the Roman Agora could determine the current hour, identify the prevailing wind, observe the weather conditions depicted by the anemoi, and plan accordingly. The tower was not merely functional but beautiful, its sculptural program and architectural proportions reflecting the Greek conviction that utility and aesthetics should reinforce each other. Unlike the Antikythera mechanism, which disappeared beneath the waves and was lost for 2,000 years, the Tower of the Winds has stood continuously since its construction. Its survival through the centuries is itself a remarkable story. During the Roman period, the tower continued to function as its designers intended, maintained and repaired as necessary by city authorities. When the Roman Empire embraced Christianity, the tower's pagan imagery to wind gods, the Triton might have made it a target for destruction, as happened to many ancient monuments. Instead, the tower was converted into a church, probably in the 5th or 6th century CE. The wind god friezes remained intact, perhaps reinterpreted as angels, or simply tolerated as historical curiosities. Christian frescoes were painted on the interior walls, overlaying but not destroying the ancient structure. This adaptation saved the building from demolition and ensured its continued maintenance. After the Ottoman conquest of Athens in the 15th century, the tower took on yet another identity. It became a tek, a lodge for members of a Sufi order, possibly the Mevlevi, or whirling dervishes. The floor level rose over the centuries as debris accumulated around the building's base, eventually burying the lower portions of the structure. European travelers who visited Athens in the 17th and 18th centuries found the tower half buried but still standing, its octagonal shape and sculptural friezes visible above the accumulated earth. The British architects James Stewart and Nicholas Revett documented the tower during their expedition to Athens in 1751 to 1753, producing detailed engravings that appeared in their influential publication, The Antiquities of Athens. These images sparked widespread interest in Greek architecture and helped inspire the neoclassical movement that transformed European and American building design. The Tower of the Winds became a model for clock towers, garden follies, and civic structures across the Western world. Its octagonal form and sculptural program imitated in contexts far removed from ancient Athens. Archaeological excavations in the 19th and 20th centuries gradually uncovered the tower's original floor level, revealing the full height of the structure and the remains of the hydraulic annex. Restoration work addressed structural damage and removed later additions that obscured the ancient design. Today, the Tower of the Wind stands largely as Andronikos intended it, a functioning monument to ancient timekeeping that has outlasted the civilization that created it. The existence of these three devices raises a question that historians have long been reluctant to confront directly. Were ancient civilizations more technologically advanced than modern scholarship has traditionally acknowledged? For much of the 19th and 20th centuries, the dominant narrative of human progress assumed a relatively steady, linear advancement from primitive origins toward modern sophistication. Stone tools gave way to bronze, bronze to iron, and iron eventually to steel. Each generation built incrementally upon the knowledge of the last. Sudden leaps or reversals were considered anomalies, exceptions that proved the rule of gradual development. The water clock of Karnak, the Antikythera mechanism, and the Tower of the Winds challenged this comfortable framework. Each device demonstrates capabilities that appear suddenly in the historical record, without clear developmental predecessors, and in some cases without successors for centuries or even millennia afterward. The Antikythera mechanism is perhaps the most striking example. Nothing in the surviving record of Greek technology prepares us for its complexity, and nothing comparable appears again until the astronomical clocks of medieval Europe, more than 1,000 years later. The mechanism represents not a step on a ladder, but an isolated peak, a summit reached and then abandoned. This pattern is not unique to timekeeping devices. Roman concrete, which allowed the construction of the Pantheon's unsupported dome, was a technology lost after the fall of the Western Empire and not rediscovered until modern times. Damascus steel, prized for its strength and distinctive patterns, was produced by medieval Middle Eastern smiths, using techniques that remain incompletely understood today. The Great Pyramid of Giza was constructed with a precision of alignment and stone cutting that continues to impress engineers. In AHKs, the evidence suggests that ancient peoples possessed knowledge and skills that were subsequently lost, forgotten, or never transmitted to later generations. The implications are significant. If technology can be lost as well as gained, then the history of human achievement is not a simple story of progress, but a more complex narrative of advances and retreats, peaks and valleys. Knowledge that took generations to accumulate can vanish in a single catastrophe: the burning of a library, the sacking of a city, the death of a master craftsman without apprentices to carry on the tradition, the famous destruction of the Library of Alexandria. Though its extent and timing remain debated among scholars, symbolizes the vulnerability of accumulated wisdom. What texts were lost in those flames? What knowledge died with the scholars who'd never escaped? Among the three devices considered here, the Antikythera mechanism has generated the most extensive scholarly debate regarding its origins. The device's sophistication implies not a single genius working in isolation, but a tradition of mechanical construction, developed over time by a community of craftsmen and scholars. Identifying that community has proven challenging, though several candidates have emerged. The most romantic hypothesis connects the mechanism to Archimedes, the legendary mathematician and inventor who lived in Syracuse, Sicily, during the 3rd century BCE. Ancient sources, including the Roman statesman Cicero, describe mechanical planetariums constructed by Archimedes that displayed the movements of the sun, moon, and planets. Cicero claims to have seen one such device in Rome, brought there as war booty after the Roman conquest of Syracuse in 2 BC. The same siege in which Archimedes himself was killed. If Archimedes did construct such devices, and if his workshop trained successors who continued the tradition, then the Antikythera mechanism might represent the mature product of a Syracusan school of mechanical astronomy. Supporting this hypothesis is the fact that the mechanism's inscriptions use a Corinthian calendar, and Syracuse was a Corinthian colony. The cultural and linguistic connections between the two cities were strong, and technical knowledge could plausibly have traveled along these routes. However, the mechanism's estimated date of manufacture somewhere between 150 and 100 BC. It places it nearly a century after Archimedes' death, requiring a continuous tradition of construction across multiple generations. An alternative hypothesis locates the mechanism's origin on the island of Rhodes, a major center of astronomical study in the Hellenistic period. The astronomer Hipparchus, active in the 2nd century BCE, conducted extensive observations from Rhodes and developed many of the astronomical theories embedded in the mechanism's design, including the calculation of the moon's anomalous motion. The philosopher and polymath Poseidon, who established a school on Rhodes in the early 1st century BCE, was known to have constructed celestial globes in Oris. The intellectual environment of Rhodes would have been conducive to the development of sophisticated astronomical instruments. Recent analysis of the mechanism's inscriptions has revealed references to eclipses visible from locations in the northwestern Mediterranean, possibly including Sicily and southern Italy. This evidence has led some researchers to propose a connection to the Greek colonies of Magna Graecia, the coastal regions of southern Italy, where Greek culture flourished for centuries. The truth may involve multiple locations: theoretical astronomy developed in one place, mechanical expertise in another, with the finished product representing a synthesis of knowledge from across the Hellenistic world. What seems increasingly clear is that the Antikythera mechanism was not unique. The sophistication of its construction implies prior experience, earlier devices from which lessons were learned and improvements made. The inscriptions on the mechanism include what appear to be instructions for users, suggesting that such devices were produced for a clientele who expected to operate them. Somewhere in the ancient Mediterranean, workshops manufactured astronomical calculating machines, and wealthy patrons purchased them. That almost nothing of this tradition survives speaks to the fragility of the historical record rather than the isolation of the mechanism itself. The water clock of Karnak poses a different set of questions, centered not on mechanical complexity, but on mathematical and empirical knowledge. The clock's tapered shape represents a practical solution to the problem of decreasing water pressure, but the precision of that solution implies understanding, whether theoretical or empirical, that left little trace in surviving Egyptian texts. Egyptian temple priests served not only religious functions, but also scientific ones. They were the astronomers of their age, maintaining centuries of systematic observation of the night sky, the system of 36 decans groups of stars, whose heliacal risings marked the progress of night throughout the year, represented accumulated knowledge passed down through generations of priestly training. The orientation of temples and pyramids to celestial alignments demonstrated familiarity with astronomical phenomena that extended far beyond casual observation. Some scholars have proposed that Egyptian astronomical and mathematical knowledge was more extensive than surviving documents suggest, deliberately restricted to priestly circles who had no reason to commit their secrets to widely available texts. The hieratic and demotic scripts in which technical knowledge was recorded were themselves specialized skills, limiting access to written information. Oral transmission from master to apprentice may have been the primary means of conveying the most sophisticated techniques, leaving no trace when lineages of transmission were broken. The possibility of influence from Mesopotamian astronomy also deserves consideration. Babylonian astronomers developed sophisticated mathematical models for predicting celestial phenomena, and trade routes connected Egypt to Mesopotamia from early times. Knowledge could have traveled along these routes, adapted and integrated into Egyptian practice, without leaving explicit acknowledgement in Egyptian sources. The water clock technology itself may have developed through exchange and refinement across multiple cultures over centuries. Experimental archaeology has attempted to test how Egyptian craftsmen might have arrived at the correct taper for their water clocks. Researchers have constructed replica vessels with varying shapes and measured their timekeeping accuracy. The results suggest that systematic trial and error building clocks, observing their performance, and adjusting the design accordingly could eventually produce effective shapes, without requiring explicit theoretical understanding of fluid dynamics. Generations of craftsmen, each improving slightly upon the work of predecessors, might have converged on optimal designs through accumulated experience rather than calculated prediction. Yet this explanation, while plausible, may underestimate Egyptian capabilities. The precision of the Karnak clock's interior markings, calibrated for 12 different months with 12 different hour lengths in each, required careful astronomical observation and mathematical calculation regardless of how the vessel's shape was determined. The integration of Stella Deccan imagery with water clock timekeeping demonstrates a systematic approach to temporal measurement that combined multiple methods into a coherent whole. Whatever the priests of Karnak knew, it was more than simple trial and error. The Antikythera mechanism and the Tower of the Winds both emerged from the remarkable intellectual environment of the Hellenistic period, the centuries following Alexander the Great's conquests, when Greek culture spread across the eastern Mediterranean and blended with older traditions from Egypt, Persia, and Mesopotamia. This era witnessed an unprecedented exchange of knowledge among scholars working in connected centers of learning. Alexandria, founded by Alexander himself and developed by his successors, the Ptolemaic kings, became the greatest center of scholarship in the ancient world. The Mouseion, translated as a museum, but more accurately understood as a temple to the Muses and a research institution, gathered scholars from across the Greek world and beyond. The famous Library of Alexandria collected texts from every source its agents could access, creating an unparalleled repository of human knowledge. Astronomers, mathematicians, engineers, and physicians worked in proximity. Their ideas crossed, fertilizing in ways that accelerated innovation. Rhodes, Pergamon, Athens, and other cities maintained their own scholarly traditions, connected to Alexandria through networks of correspondence, travel, and shared education. A scholar trained in Alexandria might later work in Rhodes. A device constructed in Syracuse might be copied and improved in Antioch. The relative political stability of the Hellenistic kingdoms, and the common use of Greek as a language of learning, facilitated exchange across vast distances. This network helps explain how sophisticated devices like the Antikythera mechanism could emerge. The astronomical knowledge embedded in the mechanism drew on Babylonian observation records, Greek geometrical models, and Egyptian calendar systems. The mechanical expertise required to realize that knowledge in bronze gears may have developed separately, perhaps in workshops producing automata, theatrical devices, or hydraulic systems for gardens and temples. The Hellenistic period brought these streams of knowledge together, enabling achievements that no single tradition could have produced alone. In recent decades, researchers have attempted to build working replicas of ancient timekeeping devices using only tools and materials available in antiquity. These experiments have illuminated both the achievements of ancient craftsmen and the difficulties they overcame. Michael Wright, a former curator at the Science Museum in London, spent years constructing a working replica of the Antikythera mechanism, using hand tools comparable to those available in the Hellenistic period. Wright cut gear teeth, assembled the mechanism, and demonstrated that it could function as ancient users intended. His work revealed the extraordinary skill required. Cutting accurate gear teeth in bronze demands patience, precision, and experience, but it is achievable without modern machinery. The ancient craftsmen were not performing miracles, only exercising expertise at a very high level. Similar experiments with water clock replicas have tested the accuracy of various designs, confirming that tapered vessels do compensate for decreasing pressure, though imperfectly. Researchers have also explored how ancient craftsmen might have calibrated their clocks, using star observations to verify our markings and adjusting vessel shapes accordingly. These replication efforts have generally increased respect for ancient capabilities. Far from revealing shortcuts or lucky accidents, they demonstrate that the devices required genuine understanding, careful planning, and skilled execution. The ancient world possessed traditions of craftsmanship that rivaled anything the modern world has produced, even if the theoretical frameworks that guided that craftsmanship were not always recorded in forms that survived. What the experiments cannot answer is how widespread such expertise was, how it was transmitted, and why it was lost. The devices remain extraordinary achievements, but they are achievements we can now appreciate more fully, having seen the effort required to recreate them. There is a particular form of arrogance that afflicts modern observers when they contemplate the ancient past. It is the assumption, often unconscious, that people who lived thousands of years ago were somehow less intelligent, less capable, less sophisticated than ourselves. We look at their tools: bronze instead of steel, water instead of electricity, muscle instead of engine, and we imagine minds similarly limited. We picture ancestors who stumbled through darkness, awaiting the distant dawn of modernity to illuminate their primitive world. The water clock of Karnak, the Antikythera mechanism, and the Tower of the Winds stand as quiet rebuttals to this condescension. They remind us that intelligence is not a function of era. The human brain that designed these devices was anatomically identical to the brain reading these words. The Egyptian priest calibrating hour markings by starlight possessed the same cognitive architecture as the modern engineer analyzing his work with computer models. The Greek craftsman filing gear teeth in a Rhodian workshop brought the same capacity for precision, patience, and problem-solving that characterizes the finest technicians of any age. What differed was not ability, but circumstance. Ancient craftsmen worked within constraints we can barely imagine: limited materials, limited tools, limited access to the accumulated knowledge we take for granted. Yet within those constraints, they achieved results that continue to astonish. They solved problems that modern researchers, with all their advantages, have struggled to fully understand. They created devices that functioned for centuries, outlasting the civilizations that produced them. The proper response to such achievements is not surprise that ancient peoples could accomplish them, but humility that we ever doubted they could. Every generation tends to believe itself the pinnacle of human development, the culmination of all that came before. These devices remind us that pinnacles have been reached before, in ways and forms we are only beginning to appreciate. The arc of history is not a steady climb but a winding path, with heights and depths we are still mapping. Consider for a moment the anonymous craftsmen whose hands shaped these devices. Their names, in most cases, are lost to history. We do not know what they looked like, what languages they spoke at home, what hopes and fears filled their private hours. They left no diaries, no personal letters, no self. What they left instead was their work objects that embody their skill, their knowledge, their dedication to craft. When a modern researcher examines the gear teeth of the Antikythera mechanism under magnification, they are seeing the direct traces of an ancient hand, the tiny file marks, the slight irregularities that distinguish handcraft from machine production. The decisions made about tooth angle and spacing, these are communications across time, messages written in bronze. The craftsmen who cut those gears could not have imagined who would eventually study them, any more than we can imagine who will study our own creations 2,000 years hence. Yet the connection exists, tangible and undeniable. The same continuity links us to the Egyptian priest who watched water levels descend in the darkness of the Karnak temple, measuring the hours until dawn. He looked at the same stars we see tonight, tracked the same moon, felt the same wonder at the vastness of the cosmos. His questions about time and its measurement were our questions, expressed in the vocabulary and concepts of his age. When we study his water clock, we are not encountering an alien intelligence, but recognizing a kindred spirit, someone who shared our fundamental curiosity about how the universe works. This recognition carries emotional weight. We are not alone in our struggles to understand and measure and predict. Across the centuries, countless minds have grappled with the same challenges, each contributing what they could to a cumulative human project that transcends any single lifetime or civilization. The devices examined here are nodes in that vast network of effort, points where individual achievement crystallized into lasting form. They remind us that we are inheritors of a tradition far older and richer than any single culture or era, participants in an ongoing conversation that began before recorded history and will continue long after we are gone. Yet if these devices inspire connection and continuity, they also carry a warning. For every innovation that survived, countless others were lost. The Antikythera mechanism exists today only because a ship sank in precisely the right conditions to preserve its bronze components for 2 millennia. Had the vessel completed its voyage, the mechanism would likely have been used, worn out, and eventually scrapped for its metal, leaving no trace of its existence. We know of it only through catastrophe, a disaster that froze a moment of ancient technological achievement in the ember of the seafloor. How many other devices met different fates? How many astronomical calculators were melted down for coin blanks or weapon fittings? How many water clocks shattered when temples were sacked? How many architectural marvels were dismantled for their building materials by later generations, who neither understood nor valued what they were destroying? The survival of any ancient artifact is a matter of chance, a lucky combination of circumstances that preserved one object while millions of others vanished. The fragility extends beyond physical objects to the knowledge they embody. The craftsmen who built these devices learned their skills from masters, who learned from earlier masters, in chains of transmission that could span centuries. When those chains broke through war, plague, economic collapse, or simple failure to find worthy successors, knowledge accumulated over generations could disappear in a single lifetime. The burning of the Library of Alexandria, whatever its actual scope, symbolizes this vulnerability. Centuries of scholarship, copied and preserved at enormous expense, could be reduced to ash in hours. Modern civilization is not immune to such losses. Our digital storage systems, for all their capacity, are far more fragile than stone or bronze. Electronic formats become obsolete within decades, requiring constant migration to new systems. A sufficiently severe disruption electromagnetic pulse. Prolonged power failure. Societal collapse could render vast archives inaccessible. Future archaeologists may find our era strangely silent, our digital records having evaporated while the clay tablets of Babylon endure. The ancient devices remind us that preservation requires conscious effort, that knowledge must be actively transmitted or it will be lost, and that what one generation knows, the next may forget. The story of these three devices is not finished. Research continues, and new discoveries emerge with regularity. Advanced imaging technologies reveal details invisible to earlier investigators. Underwater archaeology explores shipwrecks that may contain other mechanisms, other fragments of lost traditions. Egyptian tombs still yield surprises, and the sands of the ancient world have not surrendered all their secrets. In 2021, researchers announced new findings about the Antikythera mechanism's front display, proposing reconstructions of its planetary indicators that had previously resisted analysis. The Tower of the Winds underwent restoration work that clarified details of its original construction. Scholars continue to debate the origins and capabilities of Egyptian water clocks, with each new study refining understanding of what ancient craftsmen achieved. The partnership between archaeology and high technology has proven remarkably productive. CT scanning, 3D modeling, multispectral imaging, and computer simulation allow researchers to study ancient artifacts in ways their discoverers could never have imagined. International collaboration brings diverse expertise to bear on common problems. The boundaries between disciplines blur as historians, engineers, astronomers, and craftspeople work together to understand the past. Each generation inherits the questions of its predecessors and adds new ones of its own. The ancient craftsmen who built these devices were themselves inheritors, building on knowledge received from earlier masters. We continue their work, using tools they could not have conceived to understand achievements they could not have imagined would survive. The quest to understand how ancient peoples measured time is also a quest to understand ourselves, our capabilities, our limitations, and our place in the long story of human ingenuity. 3 devices, spanning more than 13 centuries, and 3 distinct civilizations, united by a common thread of inexplicable sophistication. The water clock of Karnak, carved from alabaster in the Bronze Age, solved problems of fluid dynamics that would not be mathematically formalized until the age of Newton. The Antikythera mechanism, assembled from precisely cut bronze gears in Hellenistic Greece, performed astronomical calculations that medieval European clockmakers could not match more than 1,000 years later. The Tower of the Winds, rising in marble above the Athenian marketplace, integrated sundials, water clock, and meteorological instruments into a public monument that has outlasted every empire that has claimed the city. Each device emerged from a different world, the sacred precincts of Egyptian temple worship, the philosophical workshops of Greek natural philosophy, the commercial bustle of Hellenistic urban life. Yet each reflects the same fundamental human impulse, the need to measure time, to impose order on the ceaseless flow of moments. to find pattern and predictability in a cosmos that might otherwise seem chaotic and indifferent. The Egyptian priest counting the hours until dawn, the Greek astronomer calculating the next eclipse. The Athenian merchant checking the sundial before setting out tall were engaged in the same essential project, using whatever tools their cultures could provide. What unites these devices beyond their function is their unexpectedness. Each one, upon close examination, reveals capabilities that conventional historical narratives did not predict. Each one forced scholars to revise assumptions, to acknowledge that ancient peoples knew more than textbooks had allowed. Together, they suggest not isolated accidents of genius, but a broader pattern of sophisticated achievement, much of which has been lost to time and is only now being recovered through patient research and advancing technology. The implications extend far beyond the history of timekeeping. If these three devices exceeded expectations so dramatically, what else might we have underestimated? What other ancient achievements remain unrecognized, misunderstood, or still buried beneath desert sands and ocean waves? The archaeological record represents only the tiniest fraction of what ancient peoples created those few objects that happened to survive the accidents of time, the catastrophes of war, the slow decay of neglect. For every artifact that endured, thousands were lost. For every technique that was recorded, countless others died with their practitioners. This realization demands a particular kind of intellectual humility, books that they never committed to or that they recorded on papyri, subsequently destroyed. The workshops that produced devices like the antique mechanism may have maintained trade secrets passed orally from master to apprentice, secrets that vanished when the chain of transmission broke. The question of what the ancients knew is therefore not merely historical, but it concerns the limits of our ability to know the past, the biases that shape our interpretations, the assumptions we bring to evidence that remains forever incomplete. The devices examined here serve as correctives, tangible proof that our assumptions have been wrong before and may be wrong again. They counsel openness, a willingness to be surprised by what further research may reveal. Time itself emerges from this examination as humanity's oldest obsession, from the first human who noticed that shadows lengthened and shortened with the seasons, to the engineer calibrating atomic clocks. In a modern laboratory, the measurement of time has been central to human experience. It structures our days, our years, our lives. It enables agriculture, navigation, science, and commerce. It connects us to the cosmos, to the rhythms of celestial bodies that turn regardless of human attention. The ancient timekeepers were engaged in a project we continue today, using different tools, but pursuing the same fundamental goal: to understand where we stand in the flow of existence. There is a particular silence that surrounds these ancient devices when one encounters them in museums or archaeological sites. The water clock of Karnak no longer measures the hours of temple rituals. The Antikythera mechanism no longer tracks the movements of celestial bodies. The Tao of the Wind still stands, but its internal clock has long since ceased to function. They are quiet now, their purposes fulfilled and ended, their makers dust for millennia. Yet in that silence, something persists. The questions these devices answered have not gone away. We still need to know the time, still track the movements of sun and moon, still seek patterns in the apparent chaos of celestial motion. The tools have changed. Quartz crystals and atomic oscillators have replaced water flow and bronze gears, but the underlying impulse remains identical. We are time's creatures, bound by its passage, struggling to measure what we cannot stop. The ancient craftsmen who built these devices could not have known that their work would survive to puzzle and inspire researchers thousands of years in the future. They built for their own time, to serve their own needs, using skills acquired through long apprenticeship and patient practice. That their creations endure is partly accident, partly testament to the quality of their craft. That we can still learn from them is a gift across the ages, a reminder that the past is never truly past. That knowledge built in one era can illuminate another. What did the ancients know that we have forgotten? The question remains open, and perhaps it always will. These devices provide partial answers, glimpses of capabilities we are only beginning to understand. They suggest that the ancient world was more extraordinary than conventional histories allowed, that human ingenuity has reached heights we are still discovering. They remind us that history is not a simple story of progress from darkness to light, but a complex tapestry of achievements and losses, peaks and valleys, knowledge gained and knowledge lost, perhaps in another century. Technologies we cannot yet imagine will reveal secrets. These devices still hold. Perhaps new discoveries will emerge from the earth or the sea. Other devices that will further reshape our understanding of ancient capabilities. Until then, we stand in the presence of these remarkable objects with appropriate humility, grateful for what they teach us, aware of how much remains unknown. The ancient world, it turns out, was keeping better time than we ever suspected. Thank you for journeying through time with us. From the temple chambers of ancient Egypt to the seafloor off the coast of Antioch, and finally, to the marble streets of Hellenistic Athens. These three devices the water clock of Karnak, the Antikythera mechanism, and the Tower of the Winds represent only a fraction of what the ancient world achieved, and perhaps only a hint of what remains undiscovered. We would love to hear your thoughts. Which of these three devices do you find most remarkable? The elegant geometry of the Egyptian water clock, the mechanical complexity of the Greek astronomical computer, or the enduring integration of the Athenian tower? Share your reflections in the comments below. Perhaps you know of other ancient artifacts that seem to defy their era, objects that challenge conventional assumptions about what our ancestors could achieve. We are always seeking new mysteries to explore, from lost libraries to forgotten engineering marvels. If this journey into the past has sparked your curiosity, consider subscribing so you do not miss future explorations of history's most intriguing questions. The ancient world still has secrets to reveal. Let us discover them together.